Hi, I'm Yelena.
And I'm David.
And in this tutorial, we're going to look at Baddha Konasana. It's one tutorial that's been requested quite a lot. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel, give us a heart, and comment by letting us know what you'd like to see us do next.
So Baddha Konasana means bound angle pose. Baddha is bound, Kona is angle. And it's also known as cobbler's pose, which is interesting. Little story about it from India. The cobblers, when they work, and they still do it in some of the little corner shops, then they sit like this with kind of a little stump thing between their feet, and they'll work there in front. So it's the same shape in the hips, gives you really good, we say open hips, because you're externally rotated and adducted all day long. So this is a great way to prepare the hips for deeper postures like Padmasana, lotus posture, or even like leg behind the head. And we'll talk a little bit more about that soon. But Baddha Konasana is from primary series of Ashtanga yoga in the second half of it. And there's two stages of it. So the first one is kind of the classic, where the idea is we want to bring the heels as close as possible to the pelvic floor, eventually even touching, which is actually very difficult to do. It requires so much flexibility, but that can be your target. And the heels come together and the feet open. So you see, I know in some different traditions, maybe the feet stay closed. In Ashtanga, the prescription is that the soles of the feet come away from each other, but the outer edges of the feet are touching. And we also use the hands to kind of accentuate that movement. And then we're also going to use the arms to draw ourselves into the posture. So the setup, all on Sapta, from downward dog, you inhale, jump through, and get into this position with the knees bent, heels touching, soles of the feet open, and you're holding the feet like that. And then Ashtanga, as you exhale, you're going to fold into the state of the asana. That's the vinyasa that you hold, Ashtanga. Drishti is the nose, and you would be here for 5 breaths. You're trying to get the chin to the floor with the back kind of flat. And then Nava, inhale, you come all the way up. And then there's a second position in Ashtanga, B or whatever. So we would say Dasha, exhale, fold. And the idea is you want to bring your forehead to your toes. So now you're really rounding your back. Okay, 5 breaths there. Gazes on the nose. Nasagarai. And then inhale, you come all the way up. Yekarasha, exhale there. No count, no movement. And then you would do the regular jump back vinyasa, Dwadasha, inhale, pick up, etc. Mm-hmm. So as usual, Yelena makes it look pretty easy, but for a lot of people, this is a challenging posture. Tightness in the hips restricts the movement of the thigh. It doesn't sort of drop freely. And so you'll often see when people are first doing this pose, or even after many years, they might still have the knees way up off the floor. This is kind of it, there's a funny thing we have in Ashtanga. Part of the technique of learning the asanas is that you have to get one before you move on to the next in the sequence. So this posture comes in the second half of primary series I mentioned, but we have what seem like more complicated postures earlier in the practice, like say Marachasana D, which is half lotus and a twist and requires so much flexibility.
Or Karmasana and Supta Karmasana.
Yeah. And there's conditions, right? So the condition in Marachasana D is that you have to do the full expression of the pose before you move on. The condition for this pose, before you're supposed to move on, is actually that you can do it with the knees down on the floor. So it's very easy in some ways to get into some, version of this posture with the knees up. And this might be where you stay and work for a while, but the full expression of this pose is supposed to be here with the knees down, and then your ability to go forward and touch the chin to the floor. And you wouldn't really move on before you could do that. Mm-hmm.
Two things that we commonly correct in this pose is that, we're told to use our hands to open the feet, and we are pressing the heels together and bringing our toes apart, which if you're sitting here with us and trying it, as soon as you do that, you're going to feel a lot of sensation right here in your hip, which is what you wanted. But you got to make sure not to overdo it with your hands, where we start to see people really lifting their feet off the floor, which isn't good for your knees. So while you are using the hands to open your feet, make sure that the outer edge of the foot or the feet always stays on the floor. And then two, as you're folding forward, just watch what your arms are doing. So don't let the elbows kind of come out and encourage this collapse in your upper body, and particularly around your clavicles. So as you go forward, you want the hands to stay nicely against the body. Elbows might be touching the legs, or in my case, or anyone else with short arms, elbows are probably away from your legs. So just pay attention to those two things as you do this.
And you can actually use the work of the legs to help draw you deeper into the pose. So the legs aren't completely passive, or don't need to be completely passive when you're doing it. You can, like Jelena was saying, when you start to get the right position here with the feet, you're going to feel more engagement in the inner hip. We're going to try to use the inner and the back hip to help us fold into deeper flexion. Okay, so we're catching the outer edge of the foot on the mat by pressing down through the outside edge of the foot and pressing the heels together, but it feels like we're drawing the heels or the feet away from each other. Do you know what I mean? It's a funny thing to describe, but when your heels are together, it's almost in your hips, in your inner hip, as though you're trying to pull your legs away. And that's going to start to pull the legs out of the hip a little bit, and it gives your pelvis more room to start to come forward. Whereas if you're just passively sitting in it, you can feel your thighs kind of sink back into the hips, and that'll actually block you. So you're trying to pull the femurs out of the hip to give yourself room for the hips to start to come forward here. And so it's quite active. And then once you get into a sort of about a 45-degree angle with your torso, then you can really feel the piriformis kick in as well. And you can use them to help push you into a deeper, it's like a rotation almost, right? Because what's happening is your torso is coming forward. So it's the same as if you were pulling your leg back. That's the shape that you're coming into. So you can use the hip to assist you in that work. So I always look for that kind of clutching sensation in the back of the hip.
I always look for soft jaw. So when we're working with our hips, the tendency is we're working often with some difficult emotions that get stored in the body, and particularly hips. And with hip opening, we get to often, not always, encounter anger and frustration. So it is important to watch as you're going forward and you're getting into that part of the body and the sensations are becoming strong, that you're not holding on to all the tension in your jaw and clenching the jaw, because that will also tighten the hips. There's a connection straight from your jaw all the way down to this part of the body. So make sure as you're going forward to really keep relaxing the jaw, letting there be this natural space between your upper teeth and your lower teeth, and that your tongue isn't pressing against the top of the mouth or whatever it is that you tend to do.
And you also want to be very engaged in the pelvic floor while you do this pose. So we call that Mula Bandha, root lock, which basically just means that you're trying to squeeze the muscles of the pelvic floor like a Kegel and drawing in through Uddiyana Bandha, through your lower belly as you go forward. So these are really important parts of the posture that are emphasized in Yogamala, Pattabhi Joyce's book on this pose. He says it's all about it. So you want to feel before you come forward, like Yellen is doing, like you're hollowing your belly and lifting through the pelvic floor, and then you try to hold on to that sensation as you go forward. So that's going to stop you from kind of dumping down and letting the sits bones lift. The more you pull back through the lower belly and engage the pelvic floor, the more you'll feel the sits bones stay connected on the floor coming forward.
Mm-hmm. And then lastly, this is a great pose to do if you are dealing with tight hips. So David and I always get our students at the end of their practice, after they've taken rest, to come back and just sit on their mat or against the wall to provide the support for the back, and just sit like this without pushing down. If you feel any discomfort, it's okay to put pillows or blankets under, and just sitting like this very passively for about 5 minutes begins to really create change in the body and open up the hips.
Or you could fix some shoes like that too.
Maybe. That's a whole other skill.
All right. So hope you found that helpful. Kind of a little download on Baddha Konasana, bound angle pose from Ashtanga's primary series. We have lots of other tutorials, so scroll down, check them out, and let us know if there's nothing there that you want to see, what you do want to see. We want to know. We'll make a video for you. And hit the like button and also subscribe to us, because there's more videos coming out next week. Bye.